Part 75. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 741. At this time, the shopkeeper's face was ferocious, his eyebrows were filled with a kind of gloom and coldness, and he had a murderous look on his body. "Boy, if you don't take the road to heaven, there is no way to this hell, so you can throw yourself into it. Since you want to die so much, I'm afraid I won't be able to keep you here this time." After the shopkeeper finished speaking, he suddenly jumped up, and then rushed straight towards Lin Yu in front of him the next second. The shopkeeper's speed was not slow, and he even left an after-image. When Lin Yu saw the shopkeeper's skill, it suddenly became so much stronger, and then he gently rubbed his chin. "Interesting, in order to temporarily win, I used this Qi and blood pill. Now, although I can temporarily improve my strength, do you think it is worth it?" Lin Yu said coldly, with a hint of indifference in his expression. When the store manager heard what Lin Yu said, his expression was condensed at first, but the next second, he said almost as if he was gritting his teeth, "Whether it's worth it or not, it's not up to you." The shopkeeper's expression was livid, and then he attacked Lin Yu crazily. The shopkeeper was so powerful that he waved his arms and hit Lin Yu crazily, just like this. At this moment, Lin Yu could clearly sense the aura of the shopkeeper. Although it was much firmer than before, his hair was turning gray at a speed visible to the naked eye, which meant that this guy was overstretching himself. Vitality. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu shook his head. "Hey, why do you think you are doing this? You work so hard, but you just end up like this. Why do you think you are doing this?" The shopkeeper didn't care what Lin Yu said. He punched Lin Yu's chest one after another, one after another. Lin Yu was forced to retreat continuously. After taking nearly 5 steps, Lin Yu could no longer hold back. He stood firm and let out a roar. "Okay, I originally wanted to spare your life and let you change your ways, but now, I didn't expect you to be stubborn. In this case, if I don't kill you, it will be difficult to eliminate the hatred in my heart." After hearing what Lin Yu said, the store manager just snorted. "In my opinion, he is just a little guy who can show off his skills with words. He is not worth mentioning." Lin Yu narrowed his eyes, and then took a sudden step forward. At this time, the sword hanging from his waist was finally drawn out. When the sword was unsheathed, the powerful, vast, and ethereal sword energy crazily attacked the shopkeeper. The shopkeeper, even though he secretly swallowed the Qi and blood pill before, now faced with such a sharp sword energy, he still had to choose to avoid its edge. But now, how can the shopkeeper say that, just to avoid its edge? After the store owner dodged the previous 2 sword attacks, the third one hit his shoulder, and the last arm exploded directly. After the third sword energy exploded on his shoulder, he heard a heart-rending howl from the shopkeeper's mouth. At this time, the shopkeeper looked really bloody. Lin Yu took a step forward, and then the sword was pressed against the neck of the shopkeeper. But at this moment, the shopkeeper suddenly whistled, and then in the next second, countless people rushed over, and those people rushed towards them crazily. There was a bit of indifference in his expression. After Lin Yu saw this scene, instead of showing any displeasure on his face, he just laughed. The shopkeeper thought that Lin Yu was frightened. He just glanced at Lin Yu coldly. "Boy, if you break my arm today, I will kill you today." After Lin Yu heard what the store manager said, he acted completely condescendingly. He gently crossed his arms, and then glanced up and down at the kneeling body of the store manager. "Interesting. Do you think that if you shout, I will be afraid of you? Think about it, how is that possible?" After Lin Yu finished speaking, he slowly walked forward. A vast power surged out of him crazily at that moment. At this time, a man slowly walked out. The man was wearing a black robe, but with a lotus embroidered on his chest. The man raised his head and looked Lin Yu up and down. A faint smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and there was a bit of indifference in his expression. After Lin Yu saw the man like this, he gently rubbed his chin, and then smiled like this. I didn't expect you to actually dare to show up. I was really surprised. After seeing Lin Yu say this, the man just chuckled a few times. You must be the famous sword immortal in the world, but I don't know why the sword immortal suddenly feels sorry for our White Lotus section. Why did you come to our contact point to cause trouble? After hearing what the black-robed man said, Lin Yu just smiled a little. Elderly Ansheng, why do you ask so knowingly? Don't you know the purpose of my coming to you this time? Lin Yu slowly walked towards elderly Ansheng, and the sword naturally moved away from the neck of the shopkeeper. After seeing this scene, the shopkeeper's expression suddenly turned cold, and then a bit of murderous aura surged out of his body, and his fists clenched and creaked. Asshole, damn it! After the shopkeeper finished speaking, he stood up and rushed towards Lin Yu. But at this moment, Lin Yu naturally couldn't take it seriously. Lin Yu, without dodging or evading, was attacked by Ren Yu. But the next second, when he came to about 3 feet in front of Lin Yu, he was actually cut in the neck by a sharp sword energy, and the blood slowly flowed down, and then the whole person fell backwards. Elderly Ansheng and Lin Yu did not take the death of the shop owner seriously, and even acted as if nothing had happened, because the fate of this little guy was actually nothing. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 742. Elderly Ansheng's face looked a little ugly. He took a deep breath, and then glanced up and down Lin Yu's body. Elderly Ansheng, I don't tell secret stories, but I remember that a few days ago, your White Lotus sect seemed to be robbing and massacring those well-known and righteous people in the south of the sky. Do you know that this is true? When elderly Ansheng heard what Lin Yu said, he just chuckled a few times, and then said coldly, listening to what you mean, you should be here to ask questions. I'm right. Elderly Ansheng just said this indifferently, his expression flashed a bit gloomy, and his face was quite cold. After Lin Yu heard what elderly Ansheng said, he couldn't help but burst out laughing, as if he was going crazy. That's right, this time I didn't just listen to the martial arts people in the world who came to ask for punishment, but they came to ask for punishment for me, the Tianese branch of the Ice God Temple. When elderly Ansheng heard what Lin Yu said, his expression couldn't help but condense. Then he waved his hand and smiled, if you look like this, then I'm afraid you have really misunderstood me. Because we have never have done this before. Elderly Ansheng's behavior seemed to be extremely normal, and there was no hint of panic in his expression. At this time, Lin Yu heard what elderly Ansheng said, and instantly understood that the deaths of those who came to the Ice Temple were probably inseparable from elderly Ansheng. When elderly Ansheng saw Lin Yu's expression, it was filled with a kind of indifference, and then he stared at Lin Yu with a smile on his face, his expression filled with a kind of indifference. What? Are you thinking about how to kill me now? Anyway, looking at your eyes now, I find it very interesting. Elderly Ansheng just walked slowly towards Lin Yu little by little. At this time, Lin Yu wanted to use the power of the space-time beast, because he suddenly discovered that elderly Ansheng seemed to be much stronger than he thought. But before Lin Yu could use the power of the space-time beast, he heard the space-time beast whispering, "Don't use my power for the time being. The sword in your hand, if you want to kill, if you follow him, it should be easy." At this time, Lin Yu heard the time and space beast. After saying this, his expression became a little more complicated. Why? What's the reason for this? Lin Yu's eyes were fixed directly on the space-time beast, a bit of complicated meaning flashed in his expression, and then he said in a deep voice. At this moment, the corner of the space-time beast's mouth raised a bit of a wry smile, and his face showed a complete helplessness. There is no other reason, but it is just because this guy still knew me back then. At this time, the space-time beast said helplessly. Lin Yu heard the time and space beast. After saying this, he just pondered for a moment, and then a helpless smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Oh, I didn't expect it was because of this reason. You two were very familiar with each other back then. The space-time beast shook his head. When I was still in the White Lotus sect, this young man was nothing, but it's just a pity that things are different now, and I am no longer what I was then. At this moment, the space-time beast just said helplessly, with a clear sense of helplessness in the corners of his eyes and brows. It doesn't matter. Although this guy is not weak, it shouldn't be too difficult for me to deal with him. After Lin Yu finished speaking, he jumped up directly, and then swung out a few sword chi. Those sword chi cut through the sky and blood flowed across the sky. However, in just one breath, he was completely destroyed. All of Elder Lianshang's escape routes were blocked. At this time, after Elder Lianshang saw this scene, a hint of indifference flashed through his expression. He just raised his head and looked at Lin Yu carefully, and the corners of his mouth curled up even more. He gave an indifferent sneer. Ha ha ha, although this strength is indeed not weak, but if you want to really kill the old man, it is still a little short of it. After Elder Lianshang finished speaking, he let out a roar, and then jumped up in the next second. Elder Lianshang attacked Lin Yu one after another. His speed was not slow, but in just a blink of an eye, he had already waved towards Lin Yu one after another. Nearly 10 sword energies were released. At this time, the lotus grew old at an extremely fast speed, forcing Lin Yu to retreat one after another. Lin Yu's face was slightly pale, and a hint of helplessness flashed across his face. After seeing this scene, Elder Lianshang couldn't help but burst out laughing. Ha ha ha, kid, although I thought your ability was not weak before, it seems like you are nothing more than that now, and you are not worth mentioning at all. Elder Lian continued to attack Lin Yu. After a moment, Lin Yu's face also flashed a bit of gloom, and a bit of murderous aura emerged. He just took a direct step forward, and then his body showed even more. There was a bit of murderous intent. Since you are seeking death, it would be really unjustifiable if I don't help you today. Lin Yu clenched his fists and said almost as if he was gritting his teeth. The murderous aura in his body forced Elder Lianshang to retreat one after another. At the end, Elder Lianshang also stabilized his body forcefully, and his expression suddenly became ugly. At this time, Lin Yu also knew that with his current strength, if he did not get rid of this guy as soon as possible, it might be a real trouble in the long run. So when Lin Yu thought of this, his expression suddenly calmed down, and he flew forward and took a step forward in the next second. Then he summoned the Kylin Holy Beast in front of him. After the Kylin Holy Beast appeared in front of Lin Yu, Elder Liansheng was instantly filled with an incredible look. His eyes stared at Lin Yu, and his expression was full of disbelief. How is it possible? How could the Kylin Holy Beast appear in your hands? This is absolutely impossible. At this moment, Elder Liansheng's tone was full of surprise and confusion, and his eyes stared at Lin Yu. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 743. At this time, the elder Lian took several steps back and finally managed to stabilize his figure. However, at this time, Lin Yu felt a strong sense of oppression on his whole body, directly forcing the lotus. The elder took several steps back again. After seeing this scene, Elder Liansheng knew that it would be difficult to deal with Lin Yu now. At this time, he gently rubbed his chin. After pondering for a long time, his whole body suddenly Jianfei stepped forward. The Kylin Holy Beast fell into your hands. Now I naturally understand that I am no match for you for a while. Let's put this matter aside for the time being. The green mountains will not change and the green water will flow forever. We will meet again one day. After Elder Lianshang finished speaking, he quickly retreated towards the back, disappearing in front of them almost in the blink of an eye. Lin Yu never thought that this old man Liansheng would come and go just as quickly, but he did not want to let go of this so-called Elder Liansheng so easily, because of what Liansheng Elder had just done. It had indeed angered him. After Lin Yu finished speaking, he thought about the red sand beast and the fire unicorn, and instantly rushed out towards Elder Liansheng. Elder Liansheng was attacked one after another by the two holy beasts. After seeing this scene, his expression was suddenly shocked. Boy, you have to think carefully. If you attack me now, you may not be able to bear the consequences. At this time, the elder Liansheng was almost speaking like this through gritted teeth. The blood-killing intention in his body was released without reservation at that moment, forcing Lin Yu to retreat one after another. After several steps, he barely managed to stabilize his body. After waiting for this moment, that overwhelming feeling filled the sky. Boy, since you have to force me like this, then if I don't make you pay some price, you may not be able to bear it. If this is the case, then I will definitely kill you today. That's it? Elder Liansheng let out an angry roar, and then the aura from his whole body was released without reservation, and the overwhelming intention spread across the sky. Almost at that moment, that winding momentum enveloped everyone, causing everyone to take several steps back at this moment. After seeing this scene, Bai Bingxing and Bai Binjiao's faces began to look slightly ugly. Oops, looking at them like this, I'm afraid. Bai Bingxing and Bai Binjiao's expressions darkened slightly. At this time, the Lotus Elder's entire body instantly transformed into a flaming holy lotus. At this time, Lin Yu finally understood why the elder Liansheng was called Liansheng. This guy's body was a lotus. Lin Yu half closed his eyes, and then gently rubbed his chin, with a faint smile on his lips. What I said about those evil beasts, it turns out that they should be regarded as the same race as these guys. I must be right. Lin Yu just spoke softly and unhurriedly, with a faint smile on his lips, and a hint of playfulness flashed through his affection. A bit of killing energy emerged from Lin Yu's body, and then he said in a cold voice. At this time, the voice of the space-time beast suddenly sounded in Lin Yu's mind. You are right or wrong. Strictly speaking, the evil beasts are not that many. They are the people who have passed by in our world. After Lin Yu heard what the space-time beast said, his whole expression couldn't help but twist, and then a bit of confusion flashed in his eyes, and then he half closed his eyes. If what I said is wrong, then come and tell me what's going on with those evil beasts. At this time, Elder Liansheng looked at Lin Yu and was stunned on the spot. He couldn't help but became furious at that time. He let out an angry roar and a bit of violent and cold killing power emerged from his body. Guess. Boy, you dare to be distracted while you are fighting with me. If you don't die today, I will feel uneasy. After Elder Liansheng finished speaking, he suddenly flew towards Lin Yu again. He was very fast, but in just the blink of an eye, he was already in front of Lin Yu. Then he saw the mysterious atmosphere between the two of them explode at that moment. The battle between the two of them destroyed the space, and there was a faint feeling of fragmentation. At this moment, Lin Yu gently rubbed his chin, and then he couldn't help but half squinted his eyes. A slight sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth, and a gloomy and cold murderous aura gathered around him. No matter what, you will definitely die today, I said so. After the elder Lian flew back for a while, he glanced up and down at Lin Yu. A somewhat indifferent sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth, and the murderous aura in his body began to gradually spread. Boy, originally I didn't plan to use this move, but now you are forcing me to do this. After Elder Liansheng finished speaking, the lingering aura on his body almost completely gathered together in that instant. After the surging murderous aura gathered together, almost in that instant, it made everyone feel a little bit of fear in their hearts. The next second, above the void, The fire-colored lotus quietly bloomed. Lin Yu stood in place, raised his head to the sky, just looked up and down, and then the whole person's expression began to become slightly ugly. Looking at the current situation, it may not be easy to get rid of this guy, Lin Yu said helplessly. And at this moment, the space-time beast gritted his teeth. Well, if the nest is overturned, there will be no eggs intact. If you die now, I am afraid I will be implicated. In this case, I can only help you. At this time, the voice of the space-time beast sounded so softly in Lin Yu's ears, and there seemed to be quite a bit of helplessness in the words. When Lin Yu heard what the space-time beast said, he couldn't help but feel a little happy in his heart, and his face was filled with excitement and joy. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Sheng Chang. Chapter 744. Really? If I had your help this time, it wouldn't be difficult to kill this guy. After hearing what Lin Yu said, the space-time beast also had an indifferent bitter smile on his lips. His whole expression was one of helplessness, and then he just sighed. Well, I also know that if the two of us work together, it will not be difficult at all to kill this guy, but in the current situation, if I do it, my whereabouts will be exposed. Maybe someone will come after us. At this time, the time and space beast said helplessly, with a somewhat indifferent look on his face, and a look of complete helplessness on his face. After Lin Yu heard what the space-time beast said, his whole expression tightened, and then he said softly, "Is it possible that there is nothing we can do now?" Lin Yu's voice was even slightly hoarse, and his face was even more pale. After hearing Lin Yu's words, the space beast just pondered for a moment, and the next second he shook his head. "That's right, there is nothing we can do. This guy has now used his own god. With our current situation, considering the situation, trying to force the next step is tantamount to a fantasy, so." After the time and space beast said this, he suddenly paused. He did not continue to speak, but just sighed for a long time, and then said helplessly. At this moment, after Lin Yu heard what the space-time beast said, he just pondered for a moment, and his expression became a little more indifferent. This is not necessarily the case. There is no need to expose your power for the time being. I can just solve it myself. At that time, the space beast just thought it was a little strange that Lin Yu was acting like this. He just whispered to Lin Yu secretly, "Then what do you want to do?" "I'm telling you, if..." But before the time and space beast finished speaking, Lin Yu said leisurely, "It's okay, believe me, I can solve it." A violent murderous aura began to snake out of Lin Yu's body gradually, and then a mysterious power, almost at that moment, gave everyone a sense of awe. Lin Yu bit the tip of his tongue, then held the handle in his hand, and then heard an angry roar from Lin Yu's mouth. 3,000 sword skills, stars like torches, unicorn holy fire, and yellow sand refinement, all gathered in my sword, filled with murderous intent. At this time, the red-trained yellow sand beast and the fire Kylan seemed to be able to understand what Lin Yu said. At this moment, they condensed their strength into one place and integrated it into the one in Lin Yu's hand. "Put the sword on." At this time, Lin Yu suddenly moved. He took a step forward, and then showed some decisive killing intent from his body. But with just one breath, the surging murderous aura was completely condensed. After Elder Lian Chang felt the murderous aura on Lin Yu's sword from a distance, his face instantly became completely ugly, and then he wanted to retreat, but Lin Yu at this time naturally couldn't. Let the lotus grow old. Lin Yu just took a step forward, then let out an angry roar, and then suddenly swung a sword energy forward. The sword energy swept across the sky, seeming to want to sweep away the space around it was completely cut off. But just in the blink of an eye, the surrounding space suddenly changed, and a powerful explosion occurred. The explosion seemed to want to completely fly people away. Then, the Buddha's light all over the sky turned into dots of stars, making everyone's hearts tremble. Lin Yu stood in the air with one sword and one person. He seemed to be the master who looked down on the world and arrogated all the heroes. Everyone couldn't help but feel a bit of fear in their hearts. At this moment, Lin Yu just turned his head and looked in front of him coldly, with a look that was a little indifferent in his affection. "You guys, what else can you say?" The murderous aura in Lin Yu's body began to become more and more solid, and then he slowly took a step forward. His steps were extremely firm, and he walked forward step by step. As for the Lotus Elder, he had been wiped out in the previous explosion. After seeing this scene, the people from the White Lotus sect couldn't help but look at each other like this. You look at me, I look at your face with a look of complete horror. At this time, everyone in the White Lotus sect took a deep breath, and then forcibly calmed down their minds. "Boy, you are somewhat capable this time, but the green mountains will not change and the green water will flow forever. We will eventually meet again." After those people finished speaking, they immediately prepared to turn around and leave. At this moment, Lin Yu naturally did not stop those people. He just took a long breath, and then nodded slightly, "Just leave, just leave." As soon as Lin Yu finished speaking, he felt that his vision went dark, and he lost all consciousness in the next second. His whole body was like a floating butterfly, and he began to fall to the ground at an extremely fast speed. After seeing this scene, Bai Bingxing and Bai Binjiu did not dare to hesitate for a moment, and quickly flew forward and hugged Lin Yu, with a look of concern in their faces. "Are you okay?" Bai Bingxing and Bai Binjiu looked at Lin Yu up and down, and then said softly. Lin Yu heard it, and after the two girls said so, they just shook their heads with difficulty, and then smiled. "It's okay." Then Lin Yu lost consciousness the next second. White Lotus Holy Land. At this moment, a man stood with his hands behind his back, his whole expression was indifferent, his eyebrows were full of a gloomy color, and his body was full of blood and murderous aura. Damn it, why did that kid suddenly come to mess up my good things, why? At this moment, the man was even a little hysterical, his face was a little ugly, and his whole expression was full of indifference. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 745. After hearing what the White Lotus Throne said, everyone lowered their heads completely in an instant, with a look of helplessness on their faces. At this moment, they buried their heads very low and did not dare to raise their heads at all. After seeing this scene, the White Lotus Throne felt a surge of blood all over his body, and then he coldly glanced up and down at everyone, and a bit of indifference on his body was released at that moment. "What? Why is no one dare to speak now? Aren't you very powerful on weekdays? Why is there no one to tell me what I should do now?" A bit of bloody murderous aura emerged from the White Lotus Throne. At this moment, he said in a cold voice, with a bit more indifference in his expression, and a faint sneer at the corner of his mouth. And those people buried their heads very low, and did not dare to raise their heads at all, let alone look directly at the White Lotus Throne. And just after this moment, a man walked in slowly. The man looked at the White Lotus Throne from top to bottom, and then a faint smile appeared on his lips. After seeing the man, the White Lotus Throne's expression was twisted, and then he glanced at the man from top to bottom, with a look of indifference. "Why is it you?" At this time, the White Lotus Throne almost gritted his teeth and said, and the murderous aura on his body was so stern. After the man felt the faint murderous intent on the White Lotus Throne at this moment, he just gently rubbed his chin, and a faint smile appeared on his lips. "Why can't it be me? Your Highness, I came here to help you solve your problems this time." After hearing what the man said, the White Lotus Throne just waved his hand casually, and then snorted coldly. "Humph, you are here to help me solve my problems. You are so ridiculous, do you think I will believe you?" At this time, The White Lotus throne was glaring and gritting his teeth, and a bit of indifference emerged from his body. At this time, the White Lotus left envoy just waved his hand casually. Your Highness, in fact, the solution to this matter is simple. Your Highness, don't calm down, and listen to me tell you in detail, how about it? The White Lotus throne took a deep breath, and then forcibly suppressed the raging anger in his chest. The White Lotus throne took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood a little. He looked indifferent and gloomy. I hope you can tell me something useful. Otherwise, what will happen to you at that time? I'm afraid I don't need to say more. The White Lotus left envoy just nodded and smiled, and then gently hooked his hand, and then saw a few people slowly walking over. One of them had 3 huge swords on his back with one hand, and the other had a tang sword on his back. The White Lotus left envoy pointed at the man with the broken arm. This man is called the Broken Artisan, and there are 3 swords behind him. One can break the sky, one can cut the sun and the moon, and the other can kill ghosts and gods. When the White Lotus throne saw this man, he nodded with satisfaction, then turned his head and glanced at the other man, and then glanced coldly at the White Lotus left envoy. Who is this person? The White Lotus throne's face condensed, and the indifferent aura on his body began to quietly emerge, and a surge of murderous intent almost came out in full force at that moment. At this time, after the White Lotus left envoy heard what the White Lotus throne said, his whole expression couldn't help but relax, and a faint smile even appeared at the corner of his mouth. This man is Tang Dao Awu. He is extremely skilled in using a Tang Dao. As for their true forms, they are descendants of the ancient mythical beast Kuei Niu, but they have never revealed their true forms. I don't know, and they don't say it either. In fact, now that they can transform themselves, ordinary people have no way to deal with these beasts based on their weaknesses before exposing their true forms. This is also a good thing. At this moment, the White Lotus throne nodded with satisfaction after seeing this scene, and then glanced up and down at the 2 of them, and then said calmly, "Can the 2 of them kill that guy? Don't forget that even elderly Ansheng has been killed by them." At this time, the White Lotus left envoy just waved his hand, and then a scene suddenly appeared in front of the White Lotus throne. In that scene, it was Lin Yu, as well as the 2 girls Bai Bingxing and Bai Binjiao. At this time, the White Lotus throne saw the scene displayed by the White Lotus left envoy, and a faint smile appeared on his face. Then his brows began to relax at that moment, and the corners of his mouth even smiled. Yes, I am not an unreasonable person. You defected and injured countless members of my White Lotus section. If you can kill that kid this time, then the previous things will be written off. I will take you back to the White Lotus sect and make you the White Lotus envoy. How about it? Now the White Lotus sect is declining, and for some reason, Lin Yu makes the White Lotus throne feel a vague sense of fear, so the White Lotus throne now wants to kill Lin Yu quickly, and then he can take action and take the opportunity to destroy the Ice Temple. Moreover, the space-time crack is getting bigger and bigger now. It may not take long for the space-time crack to be enough for them to get out. When they get out, they can enjoy the abundant spiritual energy in the world of strange beasts. They had no choice but to stay here before, and it was because they left a world back then that although the War of Gods was triggered, they did control the world of strange beasts. Since then, a steady stream of spiritual power has poured into this space, making the White Lotus sect like this now. The White Lotus throne now feels that there are several forces, eager to try and ready to move. Now the best solution is probably to kill all these troublemakers. When the White Lotus throne thought of this, the smile on the corners of his mouth began to become more and more obvious. A hint of indifference flashed across his expression, and a smile appeared at the corners of his mouth. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 746. At this time, the voice of the White Lotus Zo envoy pulled the White Lotus throne back again. The White Lotus throne just glanced up and down at the Bi Lotus Zo envoy, with a faint smile on the corner of his mouth. There was a flash of indifference. What? Do you have some plans now? The Balian Zoshi gently rubbed his chin, and then said softly, actually, my plan is very simple. I just want to take advantage of the Hai family's sky and sea and the clouds that day. This day, the Hai family's behind Tian Hai Shenjian, there is the support of the entire Tian Hai family. If that boy is the same, but provokes Tian Hai Shenjian, you will naturally understand what will happen without me saying more. At this time, the White Lotus throne heard Bai Lian Zhou envoy. After saying this, the whole person was silent for a while, and then nodded with satisfaction in the next second, and finally walked slowly towards Bai Lian Zhou envoy. Come over. Yes, I am very satisfied with everything you have done. A faint smile appeared at the corner of Bai Lian throne's mouth, and then he gently patted Bai Lian Zhou envoy's shoulder. Bai Lian Zhou envoy's whole eyebrows were filled with a kind of joy. A faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. My lord, the throne, is speaking harshly. Now that Lin Yu had dealt with the elder Lian Chang, he was about to go to the Jiangnan branch to investigate the department. At this moment, someone suddenly blocked Lin Yu. That person was none other than Bai Bingxing and Bai Bing. Two people on the moon. Lin Yu looked towards the two of them and just looked up and down. Then, he gently rubbed his chin, smiled softly, and there was quite a bit of amusement between his eyebrows. What? Could it be that you two have other ideas? At this time, Lin Yu just spoke softly and unhurriedly, and then glanced at the morning market in their direction. A bit of confusion flashed across his expression, and a few words flashed between his eyebrows. A sense of indifference. Bai Bingxing was naturally a bit insignificant, and he hesitated for a long time without saying a word. At this moment, after Lin Yu saw Bai Bingxing like this, a bit of confusion flashed in his eyes. At this time, Bai Binjiao smiled lightly at Lin Yu, and then said leisurely, actually, it's nothing, but I just want you to take the two of us shopping together. I'm going to the temple fair, but I don't know if you will agree or not. Two touches of crimson appeared on Bai Binjiao's pretty face, and then she smiled softly. At this time, after Bai Bingxing heard what Bai Binjiao said, he couldn't help but turn his head to the side, and then nodded like this. At this time, Lin Yu gently rubbed his chin, and after pondering for a moment, he nodded, okay, I am a little irritated by the continuous fatigue of traveling these days, so why not really do what you said? It would be nice to take a walk around the temple fair. After Lin Yu finished speaking, he slowly walked forward. After Bai Bingxing and Bai Binjiao saw this scene, their brows were filled with excitement, and their faces were full of excitement. A look of joy. After a while, several people arrived at a temple fair. At this time, the surroundings were noisy with gongs and drums, firecrackers were blasting, and the surrounding area was even more peaceful. At this time, Lin Yu, Bai Binjiao, and Bai Bingxing came to a place, in front of the stall. At this time, Bai Binjiao saw something vaguely like a person in the distance. That person seemed to be the left guardian of the ice temple. After Bai Binjiao saw this scene, she was naturally ecstatic. She turned her head towards Lin Yu, just glanced at it, and then coughed lightly. Ahem, Mr. Lin, I have some things I want to deal with this time, so I'll ask you to take care of my sister first. Lin Yu saw Bai Binjiao's anxious expression, and seemed to be slightly panicked, so at this time, Lin Yu gently rubbed his chin, and then pondered for a moment. Do you need my help? Can you really do it by yourself? When Bai Binjiao heard Lin Yu say this, a faint smile appeared on the corner of her mouth, and then she nodded lightly, with a rather indifferent look on her face. It's quite calm. You'd better not worry about this. Considering my current situation, I can still handle this little thing. Bai Bingjio said softly, and then smiled sweetly at Lin Yu, with a smile between her eyebrows. For a moment, Lin Yu couldn't help but feel drunk after seeing this scene. Lin Yu just nodded, and then came in front of Bai Bingjio and spoke so softly in Bai Bingjio's ear. Be careful at all times and don't make any trouble. If there is anything that can't be solved, just crush this token. I will feel it and will go over to help you as soon as possible. Lin Yu's words were quite firm. After hearing what Lin Yu said, Bai Bingjio's expression naturally flashed with a strange light. The indifferent air around them rose up to the sky, and then they saw that indifferent air, straight up to the sky, intertwined and swirled together, and then they exuded a bit of gloomy air. At this time, Lin Yu saw the strange spiritual power fluctuation in the distance, and then he realized that there seemed to be people from the White Lotus sect around. At this time, Lin Yu also secretly cried out that it was not good, but at this time, Bai Bingjio had already disappeared in front of them. Lin Yu felt it again, but found that the breath disappeared without a trace in such a moment. At this time, Lin Yu gently rubbed his chin, and then he couldn't help shaking his head. Strange, why did the breath disappear so quickly? Could it be that I just felt it wrong? But at this time, Bai Bingxing and Lin Yu were together, and two blushes appeared on her pretty face. The whole person secretly looked at Lin Yu with a shy look. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 747. At this time, Bai Bingxing looked at Lin Yu as if something was wrong, so he turned his head and looked Lin Yu up and down, and then said softly, "Brother Lin Yu, what happened? Why are you so frowning?" At this time, Bai Bingxing's voice suddenly changed Lin Yu's thoughts. After Lin Yu heard Bai Bingxing say this, he couldn't help but waved his hands, and then others smiled slightly. No, that's not the case. The reason why Lin Yu didn't tell Bai Bingxing about this matter was simply to prevent this little girl from worrying about her sister. However, at this time, Lin Yu's face became slightly ugly. Lin Yu gently rubbed his chin like this and thought for a long time, but he couldn't figure out the solution, let alone how this matter should go. At this time, Bai Bingxing's face was also filled with a faint smile, and then he stared at Lin Yu with such a smile on his face that his scalp even went numb. What? Is there something wrong with you? Bai Bingxing pointed to a stall selling hairpins in front of him. He lowered his eyebrows and smiled softly. There was an indescribable shyness between his eyebrows. There was a faint smile on his face. It seemed that he had somewhat complicated. At this moment, Lin Yu immediately noticed the strangeness of Bai Bingxing, and then he coughed lightly, and then smiled slightly. You mean that hairpin, right? Well, come with me. After Lin Yu finished speaking, he took a step forward, and then came to the stall. At this time, Lin Yu directly picked up the hairpin, and then gently it was put on Bai Bingxing's head. At this time, Bai Bingxing's pretty face had a hint of crimson, and then he turned his head and smiled softly at Lin Yu. What? Does my hairpin look good? After hearing Bai Bingxing's voice, Lin Yu's expression twisted slightly at first, then nodded the next second, and then smiled faintly. It's beautiful, it's so beautiful. At this moment, Bai Bingxing covered her face and smiled sweetly. At this moment, a man in white clothes holding a folding fan in the distance gently opened the folding fan in his hand and walked forward swaggeringly, his expression full of arrogance and domineering. Meaning. There was a faint smile on the corner of the man's mouth, and then he walked up to the two of them. After opening the folding fan in his hand, the man dropped a gold ingot directly in front of him. At this time, Lin Yu and Bai Bingxing looked at each other. For a moment, they really didn't know what the rich young man wanted to do. At this moment, the rich young man just glanced at Bai Bingxing with a smile on his face. I want this hairpin, and I'll give it to this girl. At this time, Lin Yu finally understood this guy's purpose. After the stall owner saw the gold ingot, his eyes became a little straight, and then he put the gold ingot away, and then said softly, "Now this stall belongs to you, master. You can do whatever you want, master." The stall owner lowered his eyebrows and looked quite happy. After Lin Yu saw this scene, he just glanced up and down at the rich young man, and then said in a deep voice, "I bought this hairpin. I'll give it to you as much as you want. But I don't have gold ingots here, but I do have the best Tianling crystal. How about giving you two?" After Lin Yu finished speaking, he took out 2 pieces of Tianling crystal from his pocket. After the owner of the stall saw these 2 pieces of Tianling crystal, his eyes became a little straight. After seeing this scene, his face was even filled with joy for an instant. This for villains. At this time, after the owner of the stall saw this scene, he even stumbled a bit when he spoke. At this time, Lin Yu just nodded, with a faint smile on the corner of his mouth, and then said softly and unhurriedly, "That's right, it's for you. Why, sample." At this time, Lin Yu stared at the owner of the stall with a smile on his face, and a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. At this time, the owner of the stall was about to stretch out his hand, but as soon as the sword light flashed by, the owner of the stall felt pain in his arm. Then he looked again and saw the owner of the stall. The arm was cut off like this. The owner of the stall grinned in pain. At this time, Lin Yu's eyes widened with anger. His eyes were fixed on the man in front of him, and a faint murderous aura emerged from him. "What do you mean?" At this time, Tianhai Shenjiun ignored Lin Yu at all, and instead walked slowly towards Bai Bingxing. "Little sister, there are lanterns today. How about the 2 of us going to the temple fair?" At this time, after Lin Yu saw this scene, he flew up without saying a word and kicked Hai Shenjiun away that day. Although Hai Shenjiun was on guard that day, he was in front of Lin Yu. It's just a small thing that makes a big difference. Duan Xiantian and Len Yunchang were shocked when they saw this scene, and then they flew forward without saying a word to block their young master. Then they saw Lin Yu standing there, and Lin Yu released his aura without reservation. Duan Xiantian and Len Yunchang seemed to be able to feel the terrifying aura of Lin Yu this time. Duan Xiantian and Len Yunchang were shocked when they saw this scene, and then they couldn't help but take a deep breath. He looked at the masked men behind him. "Take the young master away." Tianhai Shenjiun saw the scene and didn't understand why the 2 of them ordered these servants to take him away. Then he roared, "What do you mean? Let me go quickly, do you hear me?" At this time, Duan Xiantian and Len Yunchang heard Tianhai Shenjiun say this, and their expressions became slightly ugly. "Sir, I will explain what happens next later." Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 748. After Duan Xiantian finished speaking, Len Yunchang added, "Take the young master away quickly now." And at this moment, he saw a person stepping forward like this, and then he looked at that person up and down, and then waved his hand gently. "Why are you thinking so much? Don't worry about it for now. The top priority now is actually just to find a way to help the adults and kill that kid. We don't necessarily have to take action, but we don't necessarily have to be unable to help." And at this moment, after the man finished saying this, everyone's eyes turned towards the man and looked him up and down, and then showed a bit of confusion in his expression. Everyone's eyes were fixed on that guy, with a hint of indifference in their expressions. "What do you mean by this? It's really unbelievable." All the remaining subordinates that day were looking towards the masked man at this moment, with a bit of confusion in their expressions, and a bit of confusion between their eyebrows. Naturally, it is also beyond words. And at this moment, I saw that person glance up and down at Suyuyan, and then the sneer at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. "Don't forget, who exactly had the conflict between our young master and that guy just now? Although that guy's strength is not weak, I still don't believe it. This woman's strength can be as perverted as him. After that person said this, he couldn't help but laugh so much. He seemed to be completely crazy. The smile in the corners of his eyes and eyebrows was naturally self-evident, and the smiles in the corners of his mouth were self-evident. His clear smile was beyond words. After everyone heard what he said, they turned their heads and looked him up and down, and then nodded heavily. Yes, brother, what you said is absolutely true. Now as long as we capture that woman, it is absolutely fine to threaten that guy. As long as that guy is distracted, the opportunity will come. All the people looked at each other like this, and then the smiles on the corners of their mouths became more and more obvious. At this time, they saw them suddenly jump up, and then immediately move towards coming at a gallop from the front. Their speed was not slow, but in just the blink of an eye, they were already surrounding Bai Bingxing. It's just pitiful to the stall owners around here. All the goods on their stalls were destroyed by these guys. Naturally, these stall owners can't help but feel a little bit more bitter in their mouths. A somewhat helpless smile. At this time, they were looking at each other, with a look of helplessness between their brows, and the bitter smile at the corners of their mouths became more and more obvious. But just in that moment, everyone's expressions became a little more indifferent. At this time, their eyes were fixed on Lin Yu. Now, although Lin Yu was completely surrounded by the people brought by Yalong Villa and Tianhai family, at this moment, those people did not dare to act rashly. At this moment, they were just thinking about the fact that it was absolutely impossible for them to know the identities of those masked people. However, Lin Yu was dressed so gracefully and luxuriously that they could tell at a glance that they must be young men from rich families. In fact, they were just thinking that maybe then there might be a chance to find Lin Yu to compensate them. At this moment, Lin Yu just didn't know what they were thinking at this moment. If he was really called Lin Yu and knew what they were thinking at this moment, I'm afraid Lin Yu would be furious and angry. The masked men walked slowly towards Bai Bingxing. At this time, even when they looked at Su Yuyan's peerless appearance, their minds couldn't help but be so shaken. The eyes of the masked men were staring straight at Bai Bingxing, and then a faint smile appeared on the corners of his mouth, and there was a bit of playfulness in the corners of his eyes and brows. Little beauty, come call me today and take a good look at it. My brothers know how to care about beauty and beauty. The masked men were approaching Su Yuyan step by step. The indifferent smile at the corner of their mouth began to become more and more obvious, and their eyes were fixed on Su Yuyan. After seeing this scene, Bai Bingxing's expression flashed with helplessness, and a faint bitter smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. At this time, Bai Bingxing could not help but tremble slightly in his heart, and then he moved forward one after another, and after taking several steps back, his expression suddenly became cold. I'm warning you, if you dare to come forward again, you will definitely die. At this time, Bai Bingxing certainly knew what the purpose of these guys approaching him was, but they just wanted to distract Lin Yu so that the masked man could win, something as simple and despicable as that. That was all. So at this time, Bai Bingxing tried his best to keep his mood as calm as possible, and tried not to make any noise or distract Lin Yu. Although everyone had this attitude, they still looked at Bai Bingxing with a hint of indifference. The cold aura gradually spread from their bodies, and a bloody breath quietly came. Their eyes were fixed on Bai Bingxing, and then a sneer appeared at the corners of their mouths. A hint of gloom flashed across their expressions, and a bloody killing intent quietly spread out. However, in just a breath, they seemed to have made such a great determination, gritted their teeth and rushed towards Bai Bingxing madly. At this time, they were like vicious dogs, rushing towards Bai Bingxing madly, with a few ferocious flashes in the corners of their eyes and eyebrows, and a few cold smiles appeared at the corners of their mouths. Little beauty, no matter what, you can't escape this time. It's better to surrender obediently, maybe you can suffer less. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Sheng Chong. Chapter 749. Those people's eyes were fixed directly on Bai Bing-Seing, and then the smile at the corner of their mouth began to slowly become more obvious. At this moment, after seeing the scene in the distance, Lin Yu's face could not help but suddenly turned cold, and the decisive murderous aura in his body was released without reservation at this moment. Lin Yu's body showed a surge of aura, and at this moment, he let out an angry roar. You have really eaten up this bare-hearted leopard. You are a little impatient. You actually dare to make plans for my woman. If you don't kill me today, you will really be a little unjustifiable. At this time, Lin Yu was obviously hysterical, and the gloomy look on his face forced everyone to move back one after another. After taking several steps back, they managed to regain their balance. These people just looked at each other. At this moment, Lin Yu was like an angry leopard, attacking towards them crazily, but in just a breath, in just a moment, he killed them. Several people were forced to retreat back for a long time. At this time, Lin Yu didn't even come over. Lin Yunchang never expected that Lin Yu could possess such momentum despite not having even half of his true energy. All the people just looked at each other, their expressions seemed to be quite indifferent, and there was also a look of disbelief flashing in the corners of their eyes and brows. I really didn't expect, that the aura of this guy would be so terrifying. Who is this guy? It's weird, it's just too weird. Lin Yunchang said in a cold voice, his eyes fixed on Lin Yu. After looking at Lin Yu for a long time, he was still a little confused. At this time, Lin Yu snorted coldly, then slowly turned his head, looked up and down at Lin Yunchang, and then gently rubbed his chin. A hint of indifferent smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Originally, I thought you had some ability, but now it seems that the people you brought are just trash. Today I will give you a chance. Now, run away quickly, and I can still spare you. Alive, otherwise, he will be killed without mercy. At this moment, Lin Yu was almost speaking like this through gritted teeth, and the monstrous murderous aura in his body was even more obvious at this moment. That sense of bloodshed forced everyone to move back one after another and retreat like this crazily. Everyone just looked at each other, their eyes fixed on Lin Yu, and their expressions were quite indifferent. I didn't expect it, I really didn't expect it. The killing wings on your excellency's body would be so obvious, but even so, I'm afraid I'll still be disappointed this time. If I don't take your head, I'm afraid I won't wait until your excellency the day my strength is restored, it will be my death. Lin Yunchang said helplessly, turning his head with a faint bitter smile at the corner of his mouth, his eyes fixed on Lin Yu, a look of helplessness between his brows. Because now Lin Yu's strength is obviously far beyond their imagination. At this moment, Lin Yu suddenly laughed like this. He was laughing like this, as if he had gone completely crazy. The more obvious Lin Yu's smile became, the uglier Lin Yunchang's expression became. Duan Xiantian stood up slowly after suppressing the churning energy in his body. Duan Suanation's eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and the bloody evil in his body was released without reservation at this moment. The auras on those people began to become more and more obvious, and a monstrous aura instantly snaked out, straight up to the 9 heavens. After Lin Yu felt the terrifying aura emanating from the two of them, his face became slightly ugly. Lin Yu gently touched his chin, and then a faint smile appeared at the corners of his mouth, and there was a hint of playfulness in the corners of his eyes and brows. It's interesting, it's really interesting. The aura of the two of you is quite unique, but I'm still a little behind when it comes to assisting me. One yin and one yang, two qi of yin and yang, combine into Tai Chi, but if it's 1 point, that's nothing. After Lin Yu finished speaking, he immediately opened his eyes, and the overwhelming energy from his body burst out instantly. A sense of blood and murder began to gradually snake out in an instant. The overwhelming murderous intent forced everyone to move forward one after another. After taking several steps back, they were barely able to stabilize themselves. Body shape. At this time, everyone's eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, their expressions were full of disbelief, and there was a bit of a wry smile on the corners of their mouths. I really didn't expect that this guy could have such a terrifying aura. This is really unbelievable and unbelievable. Duan Xiantian, although he had just fought with Lin Yu for a while, the somewhat terrifying aura emanating from Lin Yu still called Duan Xiantian, and his face was a little ugly. At this time, Tianhai Shenjiun was carried by those people and walked out. After seeing this scene, Tianhai Shenjiun's expression was full of gloom, and the overwhelming aura on his body was instantly revealed. At this time, he heard Tianhai Shenjiun almost gnashing his teeth and saying, "Assholes, you bastards, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to kill you, let me go quickly." At this time, Tianhai Shenjiun almost gnashed his teeth and said. But even after hearing Tianhai Shenjiun say this, everyone still dared not let Tianhai Shenjiun go without authorization. After all, Len Yunchang had explained before that although Len Yunchang was under the command of Tianhai Shenjiun, they were still under the command of Len Yunchang. So even Tianhai Shenjiun had no way to command them. Tianhai Shenjiun's face turned cold, and then he gnashed his teeth and said, "Let me go, I want to go back and watch that kid die with my own eyes." Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 750. Naturally, no one dared to disobey Duan Xiantian and Len Yunchang's orders. After all, although Tianhai Shenjiun had a high status, he could not control them. At this time, Tianhai Shenjiun could only be held up by them, and he left here so slowly. Although Hai Shenjiun felt helpless that day, he had no choice. A lingering aura, blood spilled into the air, that majestic and vast power, in that ethereal burst, instantly enveloped the place where they were before. At this moment, Tianhai Shenjiun saw this scene, the whole person's face couldn't help but become slightly ugly. Tianhai Shenjiun took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood slightly. The bitterness in his heart at this moment was naturally indescribable. How is it possible? How could this breath be so terrifying? This is a bit too scary. Tianhai Shenjiun's face became slightly ugly. At this time, a hint of helplessness flashed across his expression, and there was a complete indifference between his eyebrows. A vast aura began to wind out gradually like this, and that majestic scene began to gather bit by bit in the surrounding heaven and earth. Later, that suspenseful power suddenly made everyone's hearts feel a little muddled. After waiting for a while, a light and shadow started from the void and gradually spread down. After Tianhai Shenjiun saw the scene from a distance, he knew that someone should be eyeing the place just now, and the aura emanating from it should be the original barrier. At this time, Tianhai Shenjiun gently touched his chin, and then the corners of his mouth evoked a somewhat indifferent smile. "Ha ha ha, yes, it's really good. According to the current situation, that boy will definitely die this time. Now I see what he brought over to be so arrogant and wanton with me." That day, Hai Shenjiun's entire face began to slowly become ferocious even at that moment, and his face was completely filled with an indifferent sneer. But just for that moment, a vast aura rushed towards him. Then Tianhai Shenjiun broke away from the control of those people. "Hurry back home. As for your master, I'm afraid you will die on the spot this time. But now I can give you a chance. If you follow me in the future, you can rest assured that I will definitely not treat you badly. It's yours." Tianhai Shenjiun looked towards the crowd and looked up and down, with a hint of indifference in his expression, and a sneer on his lips. At this time, After everyone heard what Tianhai Shenjiun said, they couldn't help but look at each other. The eyes of those people looking at Tianhai Shenjiun were full of helplessness. Hey, what happened this time? At this moment, everyone's expression suddenly became a little more indifferent. After Tianhai Shenjiun looked at them like this, a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. What? Could it be that you still can't let go of your previous master? If this is really the case, now you can go find them, I won't stop you. At this moment, a masked man came out, took a step forward, and then knelt down in front of Tianhai Shenjiun, clasped his hands and bowed respectfully. Young master, please calm down. They were ignorant before. Please don't be offended. This time, just follow what you said. We will just do it. Those people raised their heads, stared directly at Tianhai Shenjiun, and then said so calmly. After Tianhai Shenjiun heard what they said, a faint smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and his expression was full of satisfaction. Yes, it's really good. If that's the case, it's the best if you can be so sensible. At this time, Tianhai Shenjiun said softly and unhurriedly. After a while, a vast aura rushed straight into the sky. The vast aura swirled around, the top and bottom returned to one place, and the seven harmonies returned to one swirl. But just for that brief moment, a vast force spread out around the surroundings, and an extremely terrifying aura began to spread between heaven and earth. Lin Yu, who was still fighting with Xiantian Lenjiun at this time, saw this scene, and his whole expression became slightly ugly. At this time, he took a deep breath, then he calmed down his mood slightly. Oops, judging from the current situation, it might be difficult to escape from this world now. After seeing this scene, Duan Xiantian and Len Yunchang turned their heads and glanced at Lin Yu. What do you think this time is like? At this time, the people in the Hai family also stopped what they were doing. After all, everyone could smell a faint smell of blood, and the strong sense of oppression made everyone feel a little nervous. Very shuddering feeling. That terrifying sense of oppression spread in everyone's hearts. At this time, after Lin Yu felt the strong and silky pressure, he just rubbed his chin so gently, and then half closed his eyes. What should be done? What should be done? Lin Yu just murmured in a low voice. Everyone focused their attention on Lin Yu at the same time. After a moment, Lin Yu just nodded slightly, and then seemed to have made this great determination. If you want to survive, you'd better listen to me next. If you do as I say, you might be able to save a life. If not, you will definitely die. Lin Yu's tone was very brisk, and there was quite a bit of indifference between the corners of his eyes and brows, and a trace of amusement flashed across his expression. After everyone heard Lin Yu say this, they couldn't help but look at each other, and then nodded lightly. Now that Sir has said so, we have seen what Mr. is capable of just now. Now we will do as Mr. said. Bai Bingxing, who was on the side, quickly ran to Lin Yu's side, turned his head and glanced at Lin Yu.